Her daughter stood at the gate, mascara streaked, voice slurred. "You're not cutting me out. This legacy is mine." Evelyn didn't answer. She slid the final document across the table. Claire had forged her name. Stolen from her. Now the mother was done pretending the daughter could be saved. "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The scent of aged oak and warm vanilla drifted through the tasting hall, mingling with the hushed clink of champagne flutes and polite laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. The evening light filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the copper tones of the vineyard hills like a memory trying to stay golden just a moment longer. Evelyn Brooke stood at the center of it all, hair swept into a graceful twist, pearl earrings glinting beneath chandelier light, a deep burgundy shawl wrapping her shoulders like armor. 75. She could feel the number pressing against her bones like an uninvited guest. Across the room, Claire stood poised beside the fireplace, wine glass tilted in her hand like a prop. "Let's not pretend it matters," she said suddenly, the words slicing through the room like a cork popped too sharply. 75's just a number. No need to act like we're not all just here for the pictures and the wine." The laughter faltered. Someone coughed. Jonah, slouched on the leather settee behind her, didn't look up from his phone. His fingers swiped like he was skipping through time, already past the part where any of this meant something. Evelyn's lips parted into a small, gracious smile that felt stapled on. "Well?" she said, raising her glass a fraction. "Cheers to beautiful weather, at least." Laughter resumed, softer now, guilty. Claire smirked. Jonah didn't even pretend to notice. Evelyn placed her untouched glass on the mahogany bar and made her exit under the guise of needing air. No one followed, no one ever did. She walked the length of the stone corridor slowly, her heels echoing off the walls like footsteps in a chapel. The quiet deepened with every step until she reached her study and closed the door behind her with the soft finality of a vault sealing shut. The room was just as Charles had left it. Bookshelves lined with hardcovers they'd collected over 4 decades. His old tobacco humidor still sitting on the side table, though he hadn't smoked since the Reagan administration. She moved past it all, toward the cherrywood desk in the corner. The key was still in her locket. She opened the bottom drawer. The file inside was thick, its tab labeled in her own handwriting, Brooks Family Trusts. It had been years since she'd needed to open it. The paper was aged at the corners, but the content, still alive, still sharp. She pulled the folder free and laid it on the desk, fingers brushing over names typed in bold: Claire Annalise Brooks, Jonah Edward Brooks. Amounts that once felt like generational love, not ammunition. She sat down heavily, letting the folder sit unopened for now. Instead, her eyes drifted across the study to the mantel above the cold fireplace. A framed photograph stared back at her. Charles on his final birthday, cheeks ruddy with wine, a sliver of chocolate cake in front of him, one arm wrapped around her waist. He had whispered something that night, just for her. Make sure they understand what this place cost us. She had tried. God, she had tried. But Claire had always looked at legacy like it was something she was owed, not something to be earned. And Jonah didn't even know what it meant to earn anything. The vineyard was a stage to him, a backdrop for his next stunt. The file folder made a faint rustling sound as she flipped it open. Legal print stared back. So many zeros, so many chances. Her hand hovered over the documents, then pulled back. Not yet. She turned to the glass cabinet by the window, pulled open the drawer beneath it, and took out the small, handheld mirror Charles had bought her on their 20th anniversary. Silver-framed. Engraved, to the woman who sees everything. Evelyn looked into it now, straight on. Her face was steady, not cold, but still, like the top of deep water, waiting for a stone to break the surface. She reached over, picked up her pen, and circled one name. A sound outside, footsteps. Then the squeak of Jonah's laughter, echoing in from the front courtyard, where someone was showing off donuts in a borrowed sports car. Evelyn capped the pen and locked the drawer. The morning after her birthday dawned with a dull, iron-colored sky. the kind that muted the world and made everything feel like it was waiting for something to happen. Evelyn stood in her study, same shawl draped over her shoulders, the file now opened wide across the desk, like a map of decisions that could no longer wait. The numbers hadn't changed. Claire's trust had matured 10 years ago, untouched principle, though the distributions were regular, large, unquestioned. Jonah's fund was technically locked until 25, but the dividends alone could buy a Tesla every spring. Evelyn had always believed in giving from a place of faith. It hadn't occurred to her until recently that faith could be weaponized. Her fingers paused on one line item, an automatic quarterly transfer labeled Lifestyle Subsidy JEB. She whispered, "Subsidy for what? Entitlement?" The landline rang, an old rotary model Charles had insisted they keep. She lifted the receiver slowly, almost hoping it wasn't who she was about to call. But it was time. "Will Carter," the voice answered on the second ring. Same clipped tone, like every syllable came wearing a tie. "It's Evelyn," she said, voice even. A pause, then warmth. "Evelyn Brooks. Well, happy belated birthday. 75 looks good on a woman who's still in charge of the soil. I need to dissolve the trusts, Will. All of them." Silence. A sharp one, the kind that made her check if the line had gone dead. "Dissolve?" he repeated. "Evelyn, that's no small—" "I'm aware of what it is," she cut in. "Can you come this evening? We'll do it properly. Paperwork, signatures. I don't want a whisper of this handled over email." Will exhaled. "If that's what you want, I'll be there by 7. Evelyn, is everything all right?" She looked down at Claire's bolded name again. The ink looked smug. "Everything's finally beginning," she said, and hung up. By late afternoon, the fog had peeled back from the hills, revealing rows of vines waking to early autumn. The grapeskins were thickening, sugars rising. Harvest would come in 2 weeks, maybe 3 if the nights stayed cool. Evelyn stood by the back terrace watching a few of the vineyard hands trimming the early rot. Sophia Lynn approached from the gravel path, her boots scuffed with dust, her face damp from the sun. "You haven't been out to the field in days," she said gently, offering Evelyn a bottle of water she didn't take. Evelyn's gaze stayed on the vines. "Timing's off. Everything feels early this year." "Not everything," Sophia replied. She studied Evelyn's profile for a moment before adding, "You're not yourself. Or maybe you're more yourself than usual." "I can't tell." Evelyn forced a small smile. "Let's say I'm pruning." Sophia didn't push. "Let me know if you need help." As Sophia turned to leave, Evelyn's phone buzzed in her pocket. One new text, from Claire. "Next year, let's skip the charade. Just send a check. No thanks, no follow-up, just a line that stripped the night bare." Evelyn stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered above the reply bubble, then backed away. She walked back inside. Not to her study this time, but to the basement. The cool, earthen-smelling heart of the vineyard, where legacy was stored in rows and dust and shadow. She reached for a single vintage bottle, Charles's handwriting scrawled on the label, 86 Reserve, for the end of something. Evelyn cradled it in her hands, then set it gently back. There was still work to do. Upstairs, the sun dipped behind the western ridge. The shadows lengthened across the living room floor as headlights swept up the driveway. Will's car. Right on time. But Evelyn wasn't done thinking. In the kitchen, the oven clock ticked loud in the quiet. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing, slowly, deliberately, under the heading, Contingency Plans. She didn't know yet what Claire might do, but for the first time in decades, she was ready for anything. And this time, she wouldn't wait to be hurt first. The sun climbed lazily through the Sonoma haze as Evelyn stepped onto the gravel trail that curved through the eastern vines. The earth here smelled different, more alive somehow than the rest of the estate. Sophia was already knee-deep in a row of Malbec, snipping off sun-scalded clusters with quick, confident hands. Evelyn stopped a few feet back, arms crossed. "You're harvesting early." Sophia didn't look up. "They're thinning themselves. This heat won't hold. Better to lose a few grapes now than the whole yield next week." Evelyn watched in silence. She remembered this row. Charles had nicknamed it Little Brooks when Claire was 8 and insisted on helping dig the holes. Back then, her daughter had carried a pink plastic spade and a list of demands: no bugs, no dirt under her nails, and no waking up before 9. Still, she'd shown up. Evelyn could still see her, little sundress, stubborn chin, pushing soil over a young vine while Charles showed her how to check for root depth. She lasted all of 40 minutes, Evelyn said aloud, surprising herself. Sophia paused mid-cut. Claire? Evelyn nodded faintly. She wanted a lemonade stand by the road instead. Said we'd make more money selling to tourists than growing anything. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Hard to argue with the logic. She's been chasing lemonade ever since, Evelyn said, quieter now. Cheap profit over patience. A bee hummed. Between them. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just waited. I'm making changes to the will, Evelyn said finally, eyes locked on the trellises ahead. Claire and Jonah won't be beneficiaries. Everything will go to a nonprofit, the Brooks Foundation, focused on women in viticulture. Sophia's clippers stilled. You're sure? Evelyn looked at her. I'm beyond sure. Back inside, Evelyn shut the office door behind her and took a seat across from Will Carter. He'd arrived late that morning, tie already loosened, smelling faintly of eucalyptus and legal urgency. Will flipped through the revised paperwork, jaw tightening slightly. You understand this won't go quietly. I don't need quiet, Evelyn said. Just clean. She has the right to contest, Will pressed. Especially with this level of reallocation, if Claire finds out. She will, Evelyn interrupted, and let her try. Will studied her. She'll make it personal. It already is. He didn't argue further, just slid the final draft across the desk and handed her a black fountain pen. Evelyn signed with steady fingers. By noon, the foundation was legally named. By 2 o'clock, Jonah had gone viral. Sophia burst into the study without knocking, phone in hand. You need to see this. Evelyn took the device. It was a TikTok video. Jonah in sunglasses and a linen button-down, reclining in the passenger seat of someone's convertible. The caption read, "Old money vibes, but can't wait till they croak." He pantomimed sipping wine, rolled his eyes, then threw fake dollar bills at the camera. The audio? A remix of Rich Girl overlaid with a soundbite. I'm not working, I'm inheriting. The clip cut with him laughing and saying, Trust fund season, baby. Evelyn stared at the screen, expression blank. Sophia swallowed. It has 40,000 likes already. Evelyn handed back the phone. Delete it. I can't. It's his account. Evelyn turned back to her desk. Then get me a printout. I want it in the foundation file. Let it live forever, just like he wanted. Sophia hesitated, then left. Will stood in the corner, arms crossed, as Evelyn lit a candle Charles used to keep at his writing desk. She watched the flame, small and precise. They think legacy is leverage, she murmured. They always do, Will said. Until the rope burns. A sound buzzed from the hallway. Another message. Evelyn glanced at her phone. Claire Brooks has sent you a DocuSign request. Subject, property inquiry, forward asset review. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Claire wasn't just poking the bear, she was already starting to dig. Jonah was in the cellar when she found him, standing under the low, arched beams with a wine bottle in each hand, posing for his phone propped against a tasting barrel. The flash went off, followed by the sound of him muttering, Nah, too dusty. Gimme that Napa glow. Evelyn descended the last few stone steps, the chill of the air wrapping around her ankles like suspicion. Jonah looked up. Yo, Gran, didn't hear you. I noticed. Her voice echoed just slightly in the vaulted room. Celebrating early? He grinned, wide and lazy. Just cataloging legacy. Your words, right? Gotta keep the image tight. She stepped forward, taking in the scene. Her husband's vintage Cabernets stacked like set pieces, a bottle of the 92 Syrah uncorked and half full beside an empty solo cup. You've never even tasted this one, she said. Jonah raised his brows. So? It'll be mine anyway, sooner or later. The words struck like a snapped wire. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked back toward the stairs. "You gonna say something?" Jonah called. She kept walking, not because she didn't have words, but because none of them would have reached him. Upstairs, the light was sharper, less forgiving. Evelyn stood at the edge of the hallway for a moment, hand gripping the railing, until the sound of Jonah's laughter died behind the cellar door. Her memory pulled at her, not recent, but tender. Another day in that same room. A younger Jonah, maybe 10, sitting on an overturned crate as Charles guided his hand toward the stem of a glass. "You smell first," Charles had said, swirling gently. "You let it talk before you sip. Wine isn't just something you drink, it tells you where it came from." Jonah had giggled, awkward and eager. "This one smells like Grandpa's study." Charles had smiled wide. "Then you're learning." Evelyn had watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a rare warmth blooming in her chest. That memory collapsed as the present came rushing back. By early evening, she was in the security room, an old converted closet off the kitchen that still held the original blueprints of the estate. She typed in a new master code, changing the seller's access entirely, deleted Jonah's profile, switched the perimeter alerts to manual override. Sophia knocked once on the frame. "Need a hand?" "No," Evelyn said, "just locking doors that should have never been left open." After Sophia left, Evelyn scanned the top shelf and pulled down an old wooden cassette case. The thing had dust in its hinges. She carried it to her study, slid the small black tape into the portable player Charles had insisted on keeping even after CDs had taken over. The tape clicked, then silence, then static, then Charles's voice, clear and measured. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I didn't trust paper alone. Evelyn, if you've still got this, then you're the one who's paying attention." She sat down slowly, hands clenched in her lap. "You know what's real," the voice continued. "You always did. That's why the vineyard is yours, not just legally, not just because the lawyers said so, because you're the only one who never tried to use it to become something they weren't." He paused, then softened. "Claire will want what she didn't earn. Jonah might too. But don't let guilt talk you out of what you know is true." The tape clicked again, then stopped. Evelyn stared at the machine. Outside, the wind shifted, high and sudden, shaking the shutters. She stood, crossed to the window, and looked down at the driveway. Jonah's car was gone, but the cellar light was still on. She turned back to the cassette player, pressed rewind, then eject. The tape slid out with a soft, mechanical sigh. On the label, written in Charles's handwriting, were 3 words: "In case needed." The knock came just after 11 p.m. Measured, deliberate. Not the kind that demanded entry, but the kind that confirmed what was already decided. Evelyn opened the door to find Will Carter standing beneath the porch light, briefcase in one hand, overcoat draped across the other arm. The fog had settled low behind him, softening the edges of the gravel drive. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said quietly. "Only the rest of my life," Evelyn replied. He gave a tired nod, stepped inside, and followed her through the kitchen to the long oak table that Charles had once sanded by hand. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if it knew what kind of business was about to be conducted. Will opened his case and laid the documents out in a neat row. "Everything's here. The revocation orders for both trusts, the redistribution authorizations, the new foundation charter, and the will amendments." Evelyn reached for her reading glasses but didn't need them. She already knew what every word meant. She'd been living between the lines of these pages for far too long. "Once you sign these," Will continued, "Claire and Jonah are legally removed from all existing financial structures. The vineyard, the accounts, the secondary holdings, all will be absorbed into the Brooks Foundation." Evelyn picked up the black fountain pen, the same one Charles had used to sign their deed, their first harvest report, and, she remembered bitterly, the original trust documents that had made all of this possible. She signed Claire's name first, not lovingly, not vengefully, just decisively. Then Jonah's. By the time she reached the final page, her hand paused for a beat. Will glanced up. "You okay?" Evelyn looked down at her signature, 3 curves, crisp and deliberate. "Yes. For the first time in years, I'm more than okay. Will quietly collected the signed pages, stacking them with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. It's done, he said. Legally, permanently, and with full compliance. They can contest it, but they won't win. Evelyn sat back in her chair. A long breath left her chest, not as a sigh but as a surrender, of weight, of guilt, of expectation. And with it came tears, not from pain, from something quieter, like release. She covered her face with both hands, not weeping, but still, shaken. Will said nothing. He let her have the silence. When she lifted her head, her voice was steady. I thought I would feel some kind of mourning, but it's not grief. It's relief, pure and clear. You didn't cut them off, Will said. They already walked away. You just closed the door behind them. The grandfather clock struck midnight, deep, resonant, final. And then came the pounding at the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was fists. Angry, erratic, loud. Evelyn and Will both turned. The rhythm was unmistakable, furious, familiar. "Open the door, Mother." Claire's voice rang out, slurred but forceful. "I know what you're doing in there. You think I don't see the filings? The legal games?" Evelyn remained seated, her hands folded on the table. Will stood slowly, uncertain. "Don't," Evelyn said. "She doesn't get to be let in just because she made noise." Another series of hits landed on the door, followed by a loud kick. "You think you're going to rewrite the future without me? You think you get to erase me?" Will's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He pulled it out, read the alert, and looked up sharply. "She just tried to log into the Vineyard's finance portal using your old credentials." Evelyn turned her gaze to him, brow furrowing. "Did she get in?" "No," he said, "but I pulled a report. There were multiple login attempts from her home IP address earlier this week. Someone exported asset projections. And I just got confirmation. Claire took out a loan using those numbers. A personal loan, using future yield estimates as collateral." Evelyn stood up slowly, the back of the chair scraping across the floor. She moved to the door but didn't open it. Instead, she looked through the glass, watching the woman on the other side. Claire was barefoot on the porch, heels dangling from one hand, mascara smudged under her eyes. Her dress was wrinkled, her voice hoarse. "I didn't steal anything," Claire shouted. "I borrowed against what's coming to me. That's how legacy works, isn't it? You build on the future." Evelyn's hand rested on the knob for a long moment, but she didn't turn it. From the other side, Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "You always loved this vineyard more than you loved me." Evelyn whispered back, too soft to carry through the door. "That's because the vineyard never lied about what it was." And then she walked away. She didn't look back. Morning came cold and silent. The fog hadn't lifted. The gravel where Claire had stood just hours earlier bore no trace of her, except a single broken heel lying sideways near the porch step, like a dropped threat. Evelyn stood by the kitchen counter, her fingers resting on the receiver of the rotary phone. The number she was about to dial had been written on the back of an old wine label now flattened beside her coffee mug. She inhaled, then turned the dial. Slow, deliberate rotations. As each number clicked into place, her spine straightened. "Sonoma Mutual, Lending Division. This is Rachel." "This is Evelyn Brooks," she said, voice firm but not raised. "I need information about a loan taken in my name. I have reason to believe my signature was forged." There was a beat of silence on the other end, followed by the familiar rustle of keyboard strokes. "One moment, Mrs. Brooks. I'm pulling up your file." Evelyn waited, fingers tightening on the counter's edge. "Okay, I see a loan document here. Executed last month for a substantial line of credit secured against future estate income, signed by E. Brooks." Evelyn's breath turned to ice in her lungs. "That is not my signature," she said. "I want a copy of every form, every timestamp, every login trail associated with that file, and I want it today." The woman hesitated. "I'll forward the request to our compliance team. They may need a formal affidavit." "You'll have it within the hour," Evelyn interrupted. She hung up. By the time Will arrived an hour later, Evelyn already had Charles's old typewriter clacking on the sunroom desk. A sworn statement lay half-typed beside her, legal phrasing mingling with barely contained fury. "She signed as me," Evelyn said as Will read over the papers from the bank. "And she did it using numbers pulled from our internal reports." Claire knew exactly what she was doing. Will's jaw worked in slow, silent anger. "She crossed from entitlement into felony. We can begin preparing charges for financial fraud and elder exploitation. The paper trail is dense, but tight." Evelyn nodded once, then tightened it further. That evening, Sophia knocked softly on the study door, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but—" She stepped inside, then closed the door behind her. "Last week, I overheard Claire in the vineyard. She was on the phone. I didn't catch everything, but she was talking to someone about property lines, zoning, and potential liquidation options. She mentioned a name, Devlin Properties." Evelyn's heart slowed, then pounded. "Developers," Sophia nodded. "Big ones. They've been trying to carve up the valley for years." Evelyn turned to the cabinet and pulled out an old binder labeled Land Use, Historical. "She's not just stealing. She's selling pieces of our future before they even know what they're worth." She flipped open the binder, revealing aerial maps and water access rights, documents her husband had buried in bureaucracy to protect the vineyard from overreach. All of it, at risk now. "I need names," she said to Sophia. "Anyone who's spoken with Claire, anyone she's brought onto the property." Sophia's jaw tightened. "She came out here at least twice without telling me, once with a man in a suit and loafers, not vineyard people." "Then we build a timeline," Evelyn said. "Meetings, phone calls, document access. I want every moment she's been here accounted for." They worked for hours. Call logs, calendar exports, gate camera screenshots. The beginnings of a case, thin but growing. Sophia took notes in the margin of a crop rotation log while Evelyn highlighted witness statements in red ink. By midnight, the board behind her desk had begun to take shape, a web of names, dates, banks, and motive. And then, just as she leaned back to take a breath, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Will. Claire left town. Flight logged at 5:42 p.m. No. Destination listed. Private charter. Evelyn stared at the message for a long time, her pulse steady, but low, controlled. Then she replied, "Track her," quietly. And as she turned off the light, she whispered to the dark, "She doesn't get to vanish before I finish naming the damage." By the second night, Evelyn stopped trusting the stillness of the vineyard. It wasn't the kind of fear you could name. It was the kind that curled at the base of your spine when motion lights flickered without reason, or a weathered shutter clapped shut a beat too late. She'd lived on this land for 48 years, and yet something about it now felt observed. From her bedroom window, she could see the outline of the Malbec rose. Still, dark, and too quiet. A movement caught her eye near the old irrigation pump. Nothing solid. Just the suggestion of a shadow that shouldn't have been there. She shut the curtain. Downstairs, the study's soft amber lamp cast warm light on cold realities. The caseboard had grown more dense, lines crisscrossing names and photos, bank logos, and property plats. She stared at it, jaw clenched, then turned to the safe under her desk. She unlocked it and began removing file folders one by one. Grant deeds, trust dissolutions, private security contracts, everything went into labeled envelopes, then into a metal briefcase. A second flash drive clicked into her laptop, and she began backing up scanned documents. Her hands moved methodically, but her ears stayed attuned to every creak of the house. Halfway through copying the foundation bylaws, she heard footsteps outside her door. She turned sharply, only to find Sophia standing there, arms crossed, eyes cautious. "I knocked," Sophia said, stepping in. "Twice. I didn't hear." "You've got that look again. The one like ghosts are chewing on your walls." Evelyn didn't look up. "I'm making sure that if anyone else tries to rob me, they leave with empty hands." Sophia hesitated, then stepped closer. "Let me stay tonight. You're alone out here, and if Claire's desperate—" "No," Evelyn said firmly, finally meeting her eyes. "If she comes, I need to be the one she sees." Sophia didn't like it, but she didn't push. She looked at the loaded briefcase and the documents stacked around the desk. Charles would have built a bunker by now, she muttered. Evelyn turned to the bookcase behind her. He nearly did. She pulled down a volume of Faulkner that was far too thick for its shelf space. Behind it, recessed into the wall, was a narrow keyhole. She inserted a small brass key from around her neck, and the wall panel clicked open, revealing a compact room, bare, concrete-lined, fitted with shelves, a fireproof filing cabinet, a cot, and a backup generator. "I call it the cold room," Evelyn said. "Charles called it insurance." Sophia let out a low whistle. "You planning to sleep in there?" "Number I plan to finish this above ground, but I'm not leaving anything to chance." Once the backups were sealed and shelved, Evelyn sat back at her desk and reached for the old cassette again. Charles's voice filled the room with its familiar cadence. "If you're hearing this, Evelyn, then we were right to worry." The tape went silent for a beat before continuing. "There's a file, blue folder, locked in the third cabinet of the wine library. I marked it, if compromised. You'll know what to do. Trust your instincts, not your guilt." Evelyn paused the tape, rose, and walked briskly toward the wine library at the rear of the house. She hadn't opened that cabinet in over a decade. Dust bloomed into the air as she slid the drawer open. Inside, resting among brittle newspaper clippings and faded stock certificates, was a single blue folder. The tab read, "In case of betrayal." Inside was a handwritten list, contact numbers, estate lockout instructions, and a legal clause amendment, one that would allow for an emergency freeze on any deed transfers without a court override. Evelyn picked up the phone and dialed. "County Recorder's Office, this is Denise." "This is Evelyn Brooks. I need a deed restriction placed on Brooks Estate parcels 17A through 21C, effective immediately. Emergency override. Reference clause 12E from 1999. There was a pause. "I'll escalate to legal. This isn't typical." "Denise," Evelyn interrupted, her voice as flat as stone. "If you've ever seen me cry at a town hall meeting, now is the time to remember it." The line went quiet again, then returned with a clipped, "Consider it in process." Evelyn hung up and sat back, exhausted but alert. The wine library smelled like dust, old oak, and something colder beneath it all. She thought she heard movement again, outside the window, the same stretch of dark between vines. But this time, she didn't look away. The tires screamed across the gravel as Evelyn pulled out of the estate's front gate before sunrise, the pre-dawn sky still dark enough to blur the edges of the vines. Her leather driving gloves flexed at the wheel, breath sharp in her throat. The call from the recorder's office had come at 5:17 a.m. "There's a new transfer request, parcel 19B, submitted via proxy authorization." She didn't even ask who. She already knew. The county office was 20 minutes away. Evelyn made it in 14. She stormed through the double-glass doors, heels echoing like a war drum against the tile. A young clerk behind the counter flinched at the sight of her. "I need to speak to records. Now, name's Evelyn Brooks. There's a fraudulent deed transfer being processed under my estate. Someone is pretending to act as my proxy." The clerk blinked, then nodded, scrambling toward the back. Moments later, a woman in a navy pantsuit appeared, her badge reading Gina, title Division Manager. "We haven't finalized the paperwork," she said carefully. "But yes, there was a file dropped off yesterday. It's flagged for review since the proxy ID didn't match your usual agent." "Show me the documents," Evelyn said. Gina led her behind the counter into a side room. A manila folder waited on the table like a ticking clock. Evelyn opened it, and there it was. Her name, her estate parcel, her forged signature. It wasn't even a good forgery. The loop in the B was too tight. Her middle initial was missing. "She signed as me," Evelyn said. "We've paused the process," Gina reassured her. "Nothing's been filed with the state yet. You're in time." Evelyn took out her phone and snapped 3 high-resolution photos of the signature page. "May I ask who submitted this?" she said, voice low, cold. The woman hesitated, then opened the intake log. "A representative from Devlin Properties," she said. "They dropped it in with a batch of fast-track development proposals, listed you as approving party via verbal proxy, provided a single-point contact, Claire Brooks. Evelyn's knuckles went white. She never had power of attorney, she said, and she never will. Gina nodded, already pulling the file from the processing queue. We'll flag her name for internal review, and yours for security alert status. Good, Evelyn said, because the next time someone touches this land without my consent, they better bring a shovel. Back in her car, she dialed Claire's number. It went straight to voicemail. She waited for the beep. You tried to sell me off in pieces, she said into the speaker, her voice calm as flint. Try me again, and you'll lose more than money. You'll lose your name. She hung up. By midday, the estate was a fortress. New cameras were installed at both gate entrances, with facial recognition logs uploaded in real time. The cellar, library, and office all received keypad entry locks. 2 private security contractors from a firm Will recommended arrived by 4 o'clock. Unassuming men in plain clothes, polite but watchful. Evelyn handed them copies of the footage and Claire's forged signature. If she comes near the property line again, I want a record. Nothing confrontational, just proof. They nodded. No questions asked. The sun was low over the hills when Evelyn finally sat on the veranda, a glass of water in her hand, the documents she'd retrieved from the county filed neatly behind her. For the first time in days, she let herself exhale. Then her phone vibrated. A private message on Instagram. From Jonah. I didn't know about the loan stuff. I swear. Evelyn stared at the screen. The message was short, defensive, but it had one thing his TikToks never had: punctuation. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she opened his profile. He hadn't posted in 3 days. The silence was louder than any video. She locked her phone and turned back toward the horizon. The vines were catching the last of the light, their shadows long, like fingers stretching across the ground. And for the first time in a while, Evelyn didn't feel like prey. She felt like the storm. The smell hit her first, acrid and sharp, clinging to the early morning fog like a warning. Evelyn stepped out onto the front porch just after 6, coffee in hand, her eyes narrowing at the scorched patch of grass along the east side of the estate wall. A pile of charred vine clippings smoldered beside the property sign, its wooden post blackened, letters warped and curling inward like fists. Sophia was already out there, stomping the last embers under her boots. A garden hose lay across the gravel, still running. They used lighter fluid, she said, her voice hard. Found the can in the ditch. Evelyn's hand tightened around the coffee mug. Any cameras catch it? Sophia shook her head. The East Gate camera glitched. Signal interference right before midnight. Convenient. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, 20 minutes late and visibly bored, the fire was out, the evidence bagged, and Evelyn had already reviewed the remaining footage. The deputy, a young man with a clipboard and no sense of urgency, squatted beside the remains. Looks like a prank, he said. No structural damage, probably teenagers. They left it burning. Within 10 feet of my propane tank, Evelyn replied coldly. Still, no witnesses, no real threat. You want to file an official report? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to Sophia. Get my iPad. Sophia returned with the tablet. Evelyn pulled up the property photos, the footage timestamps, the incident log. Then she tapped record. My name is Evelyn Brooks, she began, her tone steady, her gaze fixed on the lens. I am the owner of this estate and the founder of the Brooks Foundation. If you are watching this, something has happened to me or to my property. This is my official statement regarding the harassment and financial exploitation attempts currently underway by Claire Annalise Brooks and any associates acting on her behalf. The deputy straightened slightly. Ma'am, are you suggesting your daughter— I'm not suggesting, Evelyn cut in. I'm documenting. She finished the video, saved it to the cloud, and handed Sophia a flash drive. Put this in the cold room, top shelf. Sophia nodded, lips pressed tight. By noon, the ash had been cleared and the scorched sign removed. But Evelyn's hands still shook when she refilled her teacup. That's when the knock came. Software hesitant. Not Claire. Jonah stood at the front door, hands in the pockets of a gray hoodie, looking smaller than she remembered. The sun cast a long shadow behind him, but his expression was stripped of ego. "I didn't call," he said. "Didn't know if you'd answer." Evelyn opened the door just enough to look him in the eye. "You didn't." He lowered his gaze. "Can I come in?" She didn't answer at first, but after a long pause, she stepped aside. Jonah followed her into the sitting room, where the air still smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. He didn't sit until she did. "I saw the story online," he said. "The development stuff, the fire, Claire's disappearing act." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "And you're here because?" "I didn't know what she was doing. Not the loans, not the land sale. She's been lying to everyone." Evelyn studied him. "You mocked this place. You posted videos about old money parents like we were punchlines." "I thought I'd get to inherit it no matter what," he said quietly. "Now I'm not so sure I even want to." She arched an eyebrow. "Why not?" He hesitated. Then, "Because she's bankrupt." The room went still. "What?" Jonah looked up. "Claire. She's tapped out. She borrowed against everything, maxed out cards, personal loans. She was supposed to pay one of the developers last week and didn't. That's why she ran." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the weight of that word, bankrupt, settling like a stone in her chest. Not because it was shocking, but because it meant the game was about to turn desperate. She rose slowly, crossed to the window, and looked out at the vineyard stretching toward the western hills. "Did she tell you where she's going?" she asked. "No." Evelyn didn't turn around. "Then I hope you're ready," she said softly, "for what happens when cornered animals start to claw." Will's office sat above a retired post office in downtown Sonoma. Plain brick, discreet plaque, nothing flashy. Evelyn liked that. Quiet power didn't need a front porch. She arrived 5 minutes early. Claire was already inside. She sat in a hard-backed chair across from Will's desk, legs crossed tightly, blazer wrinkled at the elbows, the makeup under her eyes doing nothing to hide the exhaustion. Her nails were chipped. Her composure cracked the second Evelyn entered. "You finally decided to show up," Claire said, forcing a smirk. "Was starting to think you'd send the vineyard manager to handle this one too." Evelyn said nothing, just unwrapped her scarf and draped it neatly over the back of her chair. Then she sat, straight, calm, silent. Will closed the door. "Let's keep this civil," he said. Claire laughed, bitter and too loud. "That's rich, considering the smear campaign. Freezing my accounts, turning Jonah against me, pretending this wasn't your fault from the start." Evelyn's voice was soft. "You forged my signature. You stole from my estate, and you tried to sell land that doesn't belong to you." Claire rolled her eyes. "Don't act like you weren't waiting for a reason to shut me out. You've never forgiven me for leaving. You've never forgiven me for not being Charles." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "You want to talk about forgiveness? Then let's start with choices." Claire blinked. "You were given equity in the vineyard. You sold your stock behind our backs. You were offered a seat on the board. You declined, said you were too busy with your startup. You cashed every check, every dividend. And now, when it's gone, you come crawling back to the house you treated like a vacation rental." Will cleared his throat. "There's something else." He opened a file, slid a document across the desk. "This came from First River Credit. It's not the only loan, Evelyn. Claire also forged a second authorization. This one tied to a rolling line of credit from a different bank. The threshold crossed into felony range last week." Claire paled. "You went digging?" "We didn't have to dig," Will said. "Compliance flagged it the moment Evelyn's affidavit was filed. The DA has been briefed." Claire turned to her mother. "So, that's it? You're just going to let them drag me into court, let me go to jail while you sit on your perfect little vineyard throne?" Evelyn stood. She walked to the window, took one long look out, then turned back. "You want me to fix this?" she said. "For the family name?" Claire nodded, almost desperate. "Yes, for the legacy. For Dad." For Jonah, Evelyn's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You erased that name the day you stole from it." Claire's mouth fell open, but the fight for once didn't come. Then Jonah spoke. He'd been standing in the hallway, Neither of them had noticed him arrive. "I'll testify," he said, stepping inside. Claire turned like she'd been slapped. "What did you just say?" "I'll testify," Jonah repeated, voice steady. "I'll tell the DA what you did. I'll give them everything. You used my name on half the paperwork. You put me in meetings I didn't understand just so you could say I was present. You said you had it under control, that Grandma would never touch me." Claire's voice cracked. "You don't mean that." "I didn't mean to end up here," he said. "But you made sure I did." Will looked between them. "Jonah, this is a big step. Are you certain?" Jonah nodded once. "She needs to own it, not just the fallout." The facts Claire's expression fractured. "You're siding with her, after everything she's done to me?" Jonah met his grandmother's eyes. "She didn't lie to me." Evelyn didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the last piece of the game fall where it belonged. Claire slumped back in her chair, silent. For the first time, she looked like a woman who understood she'd lost. The locks were changed before sunrise. Evelyn didn't give Claire a second warning. There was nothing left to negotiate. By noon, every digital credential tied to Claire or Jonah had been wiped from the estate's systems. No more gate access, cellar entry, security codes. Even the family guest log was updated. She didn't do it out of cruelty. She did it because the family line had broken, and she wouldn't let it rot the soil. Will handled the final documents personally. Jonah signed his name without hesitation, eyes steady as Evelyn watched him from across the office. "I don't want anything that came through a lie," he said. "Not anymore." And that was enough. Claire didn't come back, not for her clothes, not for the last-ditch appeals, not even for the keys to her Mercedes, which sat in the employee parking lot for 3 weeks before Evelyn finally had it towed. That same week, Evelyn moved into the Vineyards guest house, a smaller, sunlit space with just enough room for quiet. She left the main estate untouched, save for one change. She donated the house to the Brooks Foundation, converting it into a seasonal retreat for young women in viticulture. The first class would arrive in spring. By fall, applications had flooded in from across the country, daughters of winemakers, small-batch entrepreneurs, women who'd never had a foothold but had inherited soil on their hands and dreams in their veins. The local paper caught wind of it. The article ran under the headline, "From Heirlooms to Hope, Matriarch Turns Private Estate into Vineyard for Change." The photo showed Evelyn standing near the trellis-lined porch in her work boots, shawl tucked under her arm, flanked by Sophia and 2 young applicants she'd already accepted. The public response surprised even her. Letters poured in, handwritten notes from strangers across the country, mothers, fathers, step-parents, godparents, each one carrying some variation of the same story. "They turned on me when I said no. They thought blood meant ownership. They treated legacy like a debit card." Evelyn read them at night, one, by candlelight. She kept them in a carved cedar box near her bed. Some she reread. Some she cried over. None she forgot. Sometimes, late at night, she would walk the vineyard path in silence and remember the days when Claire had laughed under these skies, when her hand had reached for the vine, not the ledger. And sometimes she'd wonder where that girl had gone. But those were moments, not regrets. One evening, as the vines began to golden under the harvest dusk, a letter arrived, tucked in a plain white envelope. No return address, no elaborate seal. Just her name, handwritten in careful block letters. Inside was a single card. On the front, a photo of the vineyard in bloom. Inside, "Thank you for making me see it before I became her. Jonah." Evelyn read it twice. Then she walked out to the porch, card still in hand, and looked across the rows of Cabernet and Syrah, their roots old and weathered but holding strong. The house behind her no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a beginning. The sun dipped behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the gravel path as Sophia stepped onto the porch beside her. "First delivery's coming in next week," Sophia said. "You sure you're ready for 20 women under one roof?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Better them than ghosts." Sophia chuckled. "No shortage of either around here." They stood in silence as the vineyard settled into dusk. And then Evelyn spoke, quiet, but certain. "Next spring, we start over." The headline hit the internet before dawn. Daughter accuses wine matriarch of legacy theft. Vineyard feud goes public. Evelyn read it on Sophia's iPad with one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. Claire's face filled half the screen, photo from 5 years ago, filtered and cropped, all gloss and no shadow. Below the headline were claims Evelyn could practically recite before reading emotional abuse, manipulation, unfair disinheritance. A carefully chosen quote from Claire's anonymous source. She weaponized grief and legacy to push her own daughter out. Evelyn clicked off the screen. She's trying to bait you, Sophia said. Public sympathy play. Probably testing the court of opinion before the legal one hits. She doesn't know the audience she's playing to, Evelyn murmured. She's banking on outrage, but she's underestimating how many people have been burned by their own children. Later that morning, Will called. She's filed a civil grievance, he said, claims emotional coercion and undue influence over Jonah's decision to testify. Evelyn let out a long breath. That won't stick. No, he replied, but it will get press. And it did. By evening, 3 more outlets had picked it up. Blogs, aggregator sites, morning show teases. The headline evolved. Blood and Bordeaux, the family battle behind Sonoma's most iconic estate. Evelyn turned down every request for comment. Until one email arrived from a producer at American Legacy. A serious program, not tabloid fluff. A show her husband used to watch religiously every Sunday morning. She agreed to a single sit-down interview. No vineyard backdrops, no carefully posed photos. Just a quiet chair in the foundation's new teaching room, under soft lighting, with grapevines behind the windows and folders full of applications spread across the desk. The journalist asked if she had anything to say to her daughter. Evelyn paused, then said, "Not everything broken is mine to fix." They aired it 2 nights later. By the end of the week, the backlash had turned. Parents wrote in, elder law attorneys spoke out. Claire's attempt to sway public opinion unraveled fast, especially when court documents leaked showing the forged bank authorizations. The tide turned with one brutal headline from the Chronicle. Heir to fraud, Claire Brooks named in financial exploitation report. The internet quieted. The interview, however, continued to ripple. Donors reached out. Invitations came from universities. One letter, hand-signed by a legacy winemaker's widow, included a check for $50,000. The woman had lost her entire vineyard to a son who took it into foreclosure. The note read, "You're giving people like us a different ending." Then came a call from a nonprofit in Oregon, offering Evelyn a grant to expand the retreat model across the West Coast. By the end of the month, Will arrived at the guest house with a folder under his arm. "I've been holding on to this until the noise died down," he said, setting it on her kitchen table. "It's a publishing inquiry, memoir, full creative control. They want your story, your way." Evelyn didn't open it right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the women walking the rows of vines, young, eager, boots dusty, notebooks full. "I don't need a spotlight," she said. Will smiled. "It's not a spotlight, it's a lighthouse, and some people are still out at sea." Evelyn finally opened the folder. The offer was generous. The advance alone could fund the retreat for 2 more years. She closed it slowly. "Let me think." As Will left, she returned to her porch, the autumn breeze brushing over her skin. The sky had begun to shift again, gold to gray. A storm, maybe, or something cleaner. Her phone buzzed beside her. A new alert. Claire had gone silent again, but the publisher hadn't. Their message read, "We're ready when you are. Even ghosts leave paper trails." Evelyn looked out at the rows. Her vineyard. Her name. Her story. And maybe, soon, her voice. The photo was staged. Claire sat on a velvet couch, backlit by studio light, holding a wine glass that Evelyn would bet money wasn't even hers. The headline sprawled across the magazine's front cover, "The Vineyard Prison, How One Heiress Survived Her Mother's Empire." Evelyn didn't flinch as she read it. Claire's book deal had gone through. The excerpt released that morning was already trending. It was filled with half-memories and weaponized nostalgia. Lines like, "She made me earn love through yield," and "The vines always mattered more than I did." Evelyn didn't respond with statements or press releases. She responded with documentation. Within 24 hours, Will coordinated with their legal team to release a carefully compiled dossier. Not reactionary, just facts. Notarized loan agreements, forgery confirmations, Claire's falsified signatures side by side with authentic ones, her trust disbursement history, her declined board seat offers, her exit payout. A simple cover page read, "Statement of record, the full legacy of the Brooks estate." The narrative shifted again. National media outlets picked it up. Headlines changed from family feud to vindicated matriarch. Talk shows invited legal analysts to dissect Claire's downfall like a case study in entitlement. Jonah, for his part, made it clear where he stood. He posted a single video from the vineyard's old tractor shed, the same one where Charles once stored antique barrel hooks. "No edits. No hashtags," he said, looking straight into the camera. "My mother's story is hers, but she doesn't speak for me, or for the truth. This land belongs to the people who honor it, not those who tried to pawn it for pity." The nonprofit's inbox exploded. Donations tripled. Letters came in from women in Kansas, Colorado, upstate New York, all asking how to bring the Brooks Foundation model to their own farming communities. Evelyn found herself at the center of something she hadn't planned for, a movement, which is exactly when she started planning her exit. "I'm not abandoning it," she told Sophia one night over whiskey and crop maps. "I just don't want to become the reason it can't grow without me." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You really think they'll let you fade out?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "They won't even notice. That's the point." A week later, while sorting old photos for the memoir she hadn't agreed to yet, Evelyn found a yellowed envelope marked in Charles's handwriting. Phone numbers worth remembering. Inside was a faded contact sheet from their early winemaking days. Partners, vineyard owners, even competitors. On a whim, she dialed one. "Lenora McAllister," the voice answered. "Who's calling at this hour?" "Evelyn Brooks." There was a pause, then a slow, delighted laugh. "I thought you were a ghost." "Not yet," Evelyn replied. "You still grow?" "Downscaled. Switch to olive trees. Less romantic, more practical. You ever get tired of grapes?" "Every third day." "Well," Lenora said, "I've got a porch and a bottle of 2006 Pinot with your name on it. I might take you up on that." It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about remembering who she was before legacy turned into defense. 3 days later, Jonah came by unannounced. Not with excuses, not with a camera. He arrived with work boots and dirt under his nails, and a bakery bag in hand. "You still like lemon bars?" he asked. Evelyn stepped aside and let him in. They ate on the back porch in quiet. The sun was low, the hills pinking at the edges. Jonah set down his plate and looked out over the rows. "I saw a clip of her interview," he said. "She said you taught her to withhold love." Evelyn didn't respond. "She's not wrong," he continued. "But she's not right either. I think maybe she never understood that love isn't always a transaction. But she only learned that because you wouldn't let her turn it into one." Evelyn looked at him. "And what did you learn?" He met her gaze. "That sometimes the only way to break the cycle is to leave the inheritance behind." They sat a while longer. Then Jonah stood. "I'll be back Tuesday. Sophia said you're low on hands for bottling." Evelyn didn't say thank you. She just nodded. As he walked down the path, the wind shifted, the kind of shift that came before rain. Claire's voice still lived in headlines, but Evelyn's story was now in motion, roots dug deep, reaching forward. She didn't knock. Claire waited at the edge of the property, standing just outside the wrought iron gate, as if she already knew she wasn't welcome to step 1 inch further. Evelyn spotted her from the guesthouse kitchen, her figure backlit by the late afternoon haze, hair tied, arms crossed. She looked less like a daughter and more like a stranger clinging to something she couldn't name. Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Do you want me to?" "No," Evelyn said. "I'll take it." She walked the gravel path slowly, the sun filtering through the rows, turning the dust gold beneath her steps. When she reached the gate, she didn't open it. She stopped with the bars between them. Claire didn't speak right away. Her voice, when it came, was dry. "I'm not here to fight." Evelyn waited. I just wanted 5 minutes. Not for court, not for cameras, just you and me. Still, Evelyn said nothing. Claire's expression tightened. You think I planned to ruin everything? You think that was the goal? You didn't need a goal, Evelyn replied quietly. Just entitlement? Claire stepped closer to the gate. You never listened. You and Dad, you only saw what you wanted to see. Straight A student, debate champion, future executive. You mapped my whole life without asking where I wanted to go. And when we offered you a seat at the table, Evelyn said, her tone unchanging, you set fire to the house. Claire scoffed. I didn't get to make mistakes. You made them for me and then punished me for the outcome. You're not a child anymore. Neither are you, so stop pretending you've never failed anyone. Evelyn reached into the folder tucked beneath her arm and pulled out a small, framed photo. It was weather-worn, the corners softened by time. She held it up against the bars. It was Charles, standing at the edge of the vineyard one spring morning years ago. His boots were muddied, his sleeves rolled, and his smile the kind that didn't require a camera to summon. You know when I took this? Evelyn said. The day he finalized the trust. He told me he'd never been prouder, not because of the wine, because of the family he thought he was securing it for. Claire's face shifted, just slightly. A tremor, not a quake. Evelyn continued. This was the last man who believed in you, and you broke that. Claire's voice cracked. I didn't ask for his belief. I asked for space. You had space, Evelyn said, placing the frame gently on the stone ledge beside the gate. You had time. You had money. What you didn't want was responsibility. Claire reached for the photo. Her hands trembled, but she took it. Evelyn turned to leave. Claire called after her, but not loudly. That's it? Evelyn paused, back still turned. That's all I have left? She walked away. She didn't look back. 2 weeks later, the headlines returned. This time, not in Claire's favor. Heiress arrested in multi-bank fraud investigation. Charges include forgery, elder financial abuse, 3 institutions, federal filings. The arrest made in Phoenix, Arizona, where she'd tried to vanish under a different name. Jonah called that night. Said nothing for a long moment after Evelyn picked up. She didn't cry, he said. At the hearing, not once. She can't grieve what she never thought she lost. Evelyn answered. There was silence on the line. Do you think she ever loved me? He asked. Evelyn's eyes welled, but her voice didn't waver. I think she wanted to, and that's not the same thing. After they hung up, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. The vineyard was still. A storm had passed through the day before. The soil was darker, heavier. The vines had held. From the shadows, Sophia approached with a small envelope. This came today. No return address. Evelyn opened it. Inside was a folded note. On it, in tight, rushed handwriting. You think it's over, but legacy always finds a way to bleed. C. No stamp, no postmark, just delivered. By hand. Evelyn folded it once, slid it into her pocket and whispered, Then I'll make sure it bleeds clean. The vines remember who tended them and who tried to poison the roots. Evelyn stood at the edge of the eastern slope, hands tucked in the pockets of her linen coat, watching 20 young women line up for a photograph beneath the arbor. They wore jeans, dust on their sleeves, and lanyards bearing the Brooks Foundation crest. Rows of grapes, stitched in deep red thread. The first class of the Women in Viticulture initiative was graduating. Some would return to family land in Missouri or Oregon. Others had job offers waiting at biodynamic farms in Mendocino or small cellar startups in Washington. All of them left changed. Not because the wine was perfect, but because they'd learned how to hold a legacy without being consumed by it. Sophia stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, headset tilted around her neck like a general in charge of a very specific army. You sure you don't want to give a speech? She asked. Evelyn shook her head. They don't need my voice anymore. They've found their own. A pause. Then Sophia added, You're good at this, you know. Letting go. I had enough practice. Sophia didn't press. The vineyard had changed in subtle ways: more sustainable rows, compost systems, a new irrigation layout that cut water use in half. But it wasn't the land that had transformed. It was the air, lighter, as if something once buried deep beneath the roots had been finally unearthed, named and put to rest. Back at the guest house, Evelyn's desk now held something it hadn't in years: a manuscript, The Roots We Cut. A memoir in her words, her voice, written with the precision of someone who had lived too much to lie. Will had read the draft, said the chapters didn't just sting, they healed. Jonah had read it too. He'd returned more often now, but never to talk about Claire. Those silences were sacred. Instead, he brought his focus to the town: community gardens, after-school programs, grant applications. The old social media pages had gone dark. In their place was real work. He showed up one morning, with soil-stained jeans and a clipboard full of zoning maps. "I'm starting a co-op," he said, "for first-gen farmers. Thought you might have some advice." Evelyn smiled and handed him coffee. Advice came second. The invitation came first. She never once called him good or redeemed. That wasn't the point. He was rebuilding something, not to earn forgiveness, but because legacy had to be grown, not inherited. That night, after the graduation and the toasts and the laughter that floated over the hills like smoke from an old fire, Evelyn walked the rows alone. The moon was high, the sky cloudless. She moved slowly, hand brushing the edge of a ripe Syrah cluster, the vines whispering in their own way, alive, humming with memory. Some nights she still caught herself listening for Charles's footsteps. Others she imagined the sound of a child's voice calling between the rows. But this evening, there were no ghosts, only soil, only wind, only breath. Sophia had taken over operations in full that month: daily reports, harvest planning, internship placements. The foundation had requests for expansion into Texas and Vermont. The retreat model was becoming a movement, and Evelyn finally was stepping back. She stopped near the bench at the overlook, the one where Charles once read the first estate reports by candlelight. She sat, pulled a pen from her coat pocket, and jotted one last note in the margin of her manuscript. "No vineyard is built without pain, but the ones worth keeping are the ones we defend with grace." She closed the journal, folded her hands, listened. No voices, no demands, no headlines waiting to ambush her morning, just the vineyard breathing around her. She stood, took one last look at the land she'd once feared losing, and now fully owned in every way that mattered. As she turned to head back down the path, the sky deepened to navy, and the first star blinked above the western hills. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "It was never about what they took. It was always about what I refused to let them ruin." Evelyn's arc ends in clarity, legacy reclaimed, and no ghosts left unspoken.